The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros is a novella about a young girl growing up in a poor section on the west side of Chicago. Cisneros herself grew up partly on the west side of Chicago. Her father kept taking the family from Chicago back to Mexico, back to Chicago, back to Mexico, back to Chicago, and because of that, she never felt like she fit in either place. Another reason she was lonely was that she was the only girl of 6 brothers. And the brothers kind of paired off by age. So the 2 oldest brothers hung out, and the middle 2 brothers hung out, and the younger 2 brothers hung out, and then there was Sandra by herself. Her father didn't pay her much attention. She learned what she didn't want by watching her mother. She had a lot of respect for her mother. Her mother was highly intelligent and inquisitive, but because of the way society was at the time, she was locked into being a housewife. And she could see disappointment in her mother because of the life she had and the life she could have had. Her escape during her youth was in books. Eventually, she started writing herself. And in college, she would write things that were inspired by the typical authors that English majors would be inspired by. White authors, basically. And it wasn't until later in a grad school creative writing class that she looked around her and realized that she had a very unique story to tell that the other kids in the class could not tell. She had stories that only she could tell. Stories about race and being an immigrant and growing up somewhere surrounded by poverty and ignorance and trying to break free from all that. Only she could write stories like that. When she looked around, her classmates could not write a story like that because they all came from more middle class or upper class backgrounds. And while she wrote, she went back to Chicago from Iowa, where she was in grad school, and she started to teach high school dropouts. So the people that she was inspired by, the people struggling to break free from poverty and racism and class issues, those are the people she went back to help. So she would be their voice in her books and then try to help them escape in her work. She's taught at various colleges. In her writing, once she broke free from trying to sound like all the other classic writers, she started to develop a very, very, very unique style. And the book, The House on Mango Street, is an example of that style. It's semi-autobiographical. There is actually a house in the west side of Chicago. Well, there was. This house you can see in this picture is across the street from the house that she was inspired by, the house from her youth. But supposedly this house is the exact same structure and layout and everything. So she was inspired by her own youth and her own adolescence in the house on Mango Street. So the house on Mango Street is set in a poor section of Chicago, Illinois in the late 1960s. And the thing that makes the book unique is its format, the way it's structured. As you can see, it says it's a series of vignettes. And a vignette is a brief, evocative description, account, or episode. These are like little snapshots. So the main character of the book is Esperanza Cordero, and the book begins with the Cordero family moving into a new house and a new neighborhood. And the book is Esperanza looking around at the different people in the neighborhood and using what she sees to help form who she wants to be. It's a coming-of-age book. That's why Rite of Passage is a main theme, because she sees and goes through a lot of things that lead to new maturity. Um, but the structure of it is these tiny little vignettes, um, and each one is like a separate story. And at first, they won't feel connected. They'll feel like random. She's looking around, but it's supposed to be. You're supposed to get the sense of Esperanza just sort of glancing around the neighborhood. On Tuesday, she sees this guy walking down the street. What's his deal? The next day, she's at school and she experiences this. It feels real because of the way she does it. You'll also note that the vignettes are written in a different style than anything you've ever read before. It's almost like a mixture of prose and poetry. Prose being just regular sentences and paragraphs, and that's how it looks on the page, but it feels sometimes like poetry, in that you're not given an exact clear idea what she's saying. You sort of have to piece it together for yourself. So some themes, we talked about Rite of Passage, but home and a sense of belonging, that's really what Esperanza wants. She wants to feel like she has a home that she's comfortable with. She wants to belong somewhere. Identity is huge in this book. She's figuring out who she is by looking around at the people surrounding her. The American Dream. We're in a very poor section of Chicago. Everybody wants a better life. And then gender roles. That's another massive theme in this book, because it's a lot about, in the 1960s, the position women were put in, forced into. That's another thing. Esperanza looks around and sees all the women in the neighborhood and what their lives are like, and she uses that to decide what she doesn't want for herself. So the main characters, Esperanza, obviously, she's got a mother and a father, her little sister Nenny, Sally is a girl that she meets, Marin is a girl she meets, Lucy and Rachel are girls in the neighborhood. All these people come up. Carlos and Kiki are her two brothers that are sort of like the brothers that Sandra Cisneros had in real life. They sort of pair off and do their own thing, and they exclude Esperanza, so Esperanza having Nenny, they're kind of stuck together. Some symbols. The house on Mango Street itself is a symbol. Pay attention to shoes in this book. They are symbols. There's a vignette where trees are a symbol. The most important vignette is probably the monkey garden, and that itself is a symbol. The three sisters. And pay attention to windows and the way she uses windows specifically with women throughout the book. So obviously this is a book that's very different from anything you've read before, and for some people that makes them dismissive of it. They don't want to read it with an open mind because it's something unlike anything they've read before, which seems silly to me. You should approach it with... Don't approach it with the expectation that it's going to be a typical book, because it's not. If you approach it that way, then it's going to disappoint you. But if you approach it as something unique and sophisticated, then you might find yourself impressed.